So what? So then, right now, this is projecting a little bit into the future, but you can be thinking about this when you're figuring out the different participants and like what their roles are. You can be trying to think of the different types of justice. Um, so you're looking for a thesis, right? So the thesis for this essay, you're drawing a conclusion, which is what a thesis is, right? You're drawing a conclusion, which is like taking a position that has to do with the particular type of justice that you've decided uh, to pick and the group that you will focus on. So if you're doing the NFL, you're talking about the players, or you're talking about the owners, or you're talking about the television. If that, I don't know if that's really going to be relevant, but so you're sort of focusing on one of the groups, and you're talking about justice in relationship to them. So you're trying to, like, if you're doing the players for NFL, and you're trying to figure out the type of justice that has to do with them, right? So they're put in this position where they're in danger of seriously harming themselves forever in order to do this job. But of course, they know the risks, so they agree to it. But also, do they really know about CTE and the stuff that's going to actually could possibly drive them crazy or make them kill themselves or whatever? Like, there's a bunch of stuff, right? So you're trying to talk about justice in relationship to a certain group. If you're doing student loans, you could talk about students, right? And what type of justice best connects with their situation, right? Like, so if you're being made to pay way too much or take on way too much debt in order to get this degree, and you don't even know if you're going to get a job in this whole thing. So what kind of, like, would it is the best type of justice to, like, I don't know, put like the heads of the banks in jail? I mean, that'd be awesome, but probably it's not going to solve a whole lot, right? Like, where you just punish people. So that just punishing people, that may not be the best type of justice that would help those people, that situation. Um, so then, you trying to decide, well, distributive justice, where everybody sort of gains, because people who've been harmed by something need to sort of be compensated, which is what justice is sort of about. So harm versus compensation. Anyway, that's the general idea. Um, and I'm talking about here, I'm just talking about, you want a thesis that makes a clear statement about the position, and then you also want three supporting ideas, because I always say there should be three supporting ideas. Okay, so here's my example for student loan debt. Student loan debt involved groups might include parents, schools, banks, government, students, companies. I don't know what the hell companies, what do you think those are? Who knows? Anyways, so then I'm going to pick distributive justice, and I'm going to focus on students. Meaning, so let me read this. Okay. So one way to help you think about the subject in order to generate strong thesis statements is to find a way to use the word while. This is actually like a template idea, right? By using the word while, it allows you to say the most. You're able to be like, while this may be true, there's also this. So just using that template, just using that word, will help you have a thesis that you can develop more. So I have, while college students are somewhat aware of the financial commitment they make when they enroll in college, the principles of distributive justice reveal that the students are bearing more and more of the burden within the system of higher education and realizing fewer and fewer benefits. So I'm taking a stand of some sort, and I'm doing it through sort of the lens, right? The lens of distributive justice. That'd be a way to think about it. All right, so I'm going to look at their situation through this lens, and what happens is I'm figuring out that they're actually being harmed more than they're being helped. So if you brought distributive justice into the situation, the idea would be like, okay, we want to make sure that people aren't being harmed, more than they're being helped. You want there to be some sort of even level idea where everybody's being compensated more than they're just being harmed. Especially for something like education, where the theory used to be, right, that it's supposed to help you in society with jobs, social mobility, and all that. Um, and then once I have some sort of big idea, now I'm trying to think of like 3 supporting ideas, which is the game for all essays. All essays are about, let me find a thesis, let me find 3 main ideas. Or, let me find 3 main ideas and then I'll create a thesis out of it. That also works for some people. Depends sort of like how your mind works. Um, all right, so in this world, I'm like, I have my 3 ideas. I'm going to probably do this next week also, or get more into this, because this is really a lot about when you start to apply justice to the subject after you've figured out, how everybody else is involved. Um, so these are my 3 main ideas that I came up with. So I'm going to explain distributive justice and how it connects basically to higher education. That's my first main goal. When the principles of distributive justice are applied to the higher education system, it becomes clear that students are the most valuable group who are most necessary to the success of higher education. I'll talk about distributive justice and find quotes from it and so on. I don't know if I agree with this stuff. But anyway, this is what I came up with. And then I'll do the financial burden. So my first one's basically going to be like, look, without students, you have nothing. My second one's going to be like, by the way, students are the ones who are suffering the most in this situation. If you look at all the other groups, who is suffering the most, that's where you apply justice, right? Because justice, the theory about justice is that you're applying it to a group that is suffering or being harmed. Right, and that's where you train your attention. You go, okay, how can we fix it so they're not being harmed? Right now, you're like, look, students are totally necessary, and they're the ones who are getting screwed the most with these debts and so on. And then I'll prove this idea that while they're the most important part of this equation, and while they're the ones who are sort of being harmed the most, they're also the ones who have the least ability to change anything. So I will explain this idea, because within all of those groups, right, this is why it's super important to do the first part where you figure out who the groups are. Because one thing you want to be able to do is be like, all right, well, if you look at all the groups here, like who is suffering the most from student loan debt? I mean, you can even be like, oh yeah, I mean, parents, maybe they help and they go into debt a little bit, whatever. The schools are getting their money, the banks are getting their interest rates, the government's getting their payback and slight interest rates or whatever. Students are just, they're the ones who have to deal, basically. Right, same idea. So I did another example for the NFL. Right, so I'm going to try to point out this concept that, yeah, who's being most harmed in this situation? I'm going to say that the players are. So I'm going to pick the players. So while football players are somewhat aware of the risks they are taking by playing for the NFL, under the principle of distributive justice, the players are bearing more and more of the burden of the NFL's success and realizing fewer and fewer benefits. Same idea. I'm picking the group that's being harmed the most. I'm going to pick a certain system of justice, and I'm going to show the problem, and I'm also supposed to try to explain how, here's what would happen if we applied this, right? Here's how the system would change if we were being fair, and we weren't super interested in just harming people. Again, you're taking a position, you're drawing a conclusion. That's sort of the main thing for this essay. And again, this is another pattern, right? The idea, so my first one will be like, here's what distributive justice is. I will define it, explain it. I'll explain it in relationship to the NFL and to the players and to concussions. So I'll sort of get that set up for them. And then here we go into topic sentences. Again, like I said, I'll do some of this next week because we're not really in topic sentence world for the essay yet. But just to give you sort of a broad scope of it, I guess. They're the most valuable assets in the league. So literally, it's the same. I'm using the same pattern as I did with students. So I'm going to say students are the most important. You need to recognize that. I'm going to say that players are most important because without the players, guess what? No NFL, right? Um, then I have this burdens and benefits, and trying to show that the players are harmed the most out of everybody, meaning they're the ones, and that's where that idea of concussions and harming themselves comes into it. And then my last point will be about the actual study, which is, if you haven't read it yet, I mean, one of the ideas in the study is that the study is done in a way that's sort of concealing truth. That's the problem with the study. It's not super out there with the, hey, this is dangerous. They're mostly being like, yeah, not so dangerous. And I think there's a connection. The title has to do with tobacco, and I think that comes from the fact that tobacco lawyers, like the people who represented tobacco companies back in the day, some of the same firms or whatever, also dealt with this subject. So they're trying to make this connection that, okay, you got a bunch of lawyers who are super pro at um, hiding hiding information, because that's exactly what tobacco companies did for decades. And now they're here turning their attention to the NFL, and what they're doing is they're massaging the data so that it's like, yeah, 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 some people get hurt, but it's no big deal or whatever. It's not quite that bad, but that's the idea. Anyway, once you read the article. All right, I'm not going to go into all. I'm going to actually save that. Because the rest of this thing has to do with actual different paragraphs that you would write and how you would write them. But what I'm interested in right now is making sure people understand what they're trying to do for their subject. Exactly. So this week is very much focused. So wait, you're doing student loan, right? So what I want to know is sort of which article you're going to use. Yeah. So this week is basically just about the article. So if you're doing student loan, you're going to pick one of these articles: the benefit of borrowing, growing trend, or who will really benefit. You're going to pick one of those. Your job is to read it, obviously, understand it, and then figure out the different what that article says about the different participants in the issue, right? So this article, talks about students this way. It talks about colleges this way. It talks about banks this way. So you're just trying to identify, you're trying to become familiar with the subject enough so that you know who's involved and sort of what each sector, what each participant, what role they play in the situation. You're trying to determine, who's being harmed, essentially, according to your article. So you are only going to pick one of the articles, and your job is to decide, okay, according to this article, here are the participants. They mention these people or these groups or whatever, and then they are clearly pointing out, who's being harmed by this and in what way they're being harmed. So it's very much just trying to get you to think about it, like to read the article and think about who's involved, what their role is, how they're being harmed or benefiting, and that's what you're posting on the discussion board. Then next week it's about applying the justice principle. You're going to pick one of the types of justices. You're going to sort of explain how it connects to your subject, and then develop a thesis for this essay. So I would say that that's basically the goal. I wanted to know, just